An icon is typically a painting depicting Christ, Mary, saints and/or angels, which is venerated among Eastern Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox, and in certain Catholic churches, though especially associated with portrait-style images concentrating on one or two main figures. The term is also used for most religious images in a variety of artistic media produced by Eastern Christianity, including narrative scenes. Icons may also be cast in metal, carved in stone, embroidered on cloth, painted on wood, done in mosaic or fresco work, printed on paper or metal, etc. Icons are often illuminated with a candle, a jar of oil with a wick. The illumination of religious images with lamps or candles is an ancient practice predating Christianity. Although common in translated works from Greek or Russian, the English term iconography does not mean the art of icon painting. An iconographer does not mean an artist of icons, which are painted or carved, not written, as they are in those languages. Comparable images from Western Christianity are generally not described as icons, although iconic may be used to describe a static style of devotional image. History. Emergence of the icon. Christian tradition, starting from the 8th century, states that Luke the Evangelist was the first icon painter. Aside from the legend that Pilate had made an image of Christ, the 4th century Eusebius of Caesarea, in his church history, provides a more substantial reference to a first icon of Jesus. He relates that King Abgar of Edessa sent a letter to Jesus at Jerusalem, asking Jesus to come and heal him of an illness. In this version there is no image. In the later account found in the Syriac doctrine of a painted image of Jesus is mentioned in the story, and even later, in the account given by Evagrius, the painted image is transformed into an image that miraculously appeared on a towel when Christ pressed the cloth to his wet face. Further legends relate that the cloth remained in Edessa until the 10th century, when it was taken to Constantinople. In 1204 it was lost when Constantinople was sacked by Crusaders, but its iconic type had been well fixed in numerous copies. The earliest written records of Christian images treated like icons in a pagan or Gnostic context are offered by the 4th century Christian Elias Lampridius in the life of Alexander Severus that was part of the Augustan history. According to Lampridius, the Emperor Alexander Severus, who was not a Christian, had kept a domestic chapel for the veneration of images of deified emperors, of portraits of his ancestors, and of Christ. Apollonius, Orpheus and Abraham. Irenaeus, in his Against Heresies, says scornfully of the Gnostic Carpocratians, they also possess images, some of them painted, and others formed from different kinds of material, while they maintain that a likeness of Christ was made by Pilate at the time when Jesus lived. Among them, they crown these images, and set them up along with the images of the philosophers of the world, that is to say, with the images of Pythagoras, and Plato, and Aristotle, and the rest. They have also other modes of honoring these images, after the same manner of the Gentiles. Saint Irenaeus, on the other hand, does not speak critically of icons or portraits in a general sense, only of certain Gnostic sectarians' use of icons. Another criticism of image veneration is found in the non-canonical 2nd century Acts of John, in which the Apostle John discovers that one of his followers has had a portrait made of him, and is venerating it. He went into the bedchamber, and saw the portrait of an old man crowned with garlands, and lamps and altars set before it. And he called him and said, Lycomedes, what do you mean by this matter of the portrait? Can it be one of thy gods that is painted here? For I see that you are still living in heathen fashion. Later in the passage John says, but this that you have now done is childish and imperfect. You have drawn a dead likeness of the dead. At least some of the hierarchy of the Church was still strictly opposed to icons in the early 4th century. At the Spanish non-ecumenical Synod of Elvira, bishops concluded pictures are not to be placed in churches, so that they do not become objects of worship and adoration. Bishop Epiphanius of Salamis wrote his letter 51 to John, Bishop of Jerusalem, in which he recounted how he tore down an image in a church and admonished the other bishop that such images are opposed to our religion. Elsewhere in his church history, Eusebius reports seeing what he took to be portraits of Jesus, Peter and Paul, and also mentions a bronze statue at Panias, of which he wrote, "They say that this statue is an image of Jesus." Further, he relates that locals thought the image to be a memorial of the healing of the woman with an issue of blood by Jesus, because it depicted a standing man wearing a double cloak and with arm outstretched, and a woman kneeling before him with arms reaching out as if in supplication. John Francis Wilson thinks it possible to have been a pagan bronze statue whose true identity had been forgotten. Some have thought it to be Aesculapius, the god of healing, but the description of the standing figure and the woman kneeling in supplication is precisely that found on coins depicting the bearded emperor Hadrian reaching out to a female figure symbolizing a province kneeling before him. When asked by Constantia for an image of Jesus, Eusebius denied the request, replying that to depict purely the human form of Christ before its transformation, on the other hand, is to break the commandment of God and to fall into pagan error. After Christianity was legalized by the Emperor Constantine I within the Roman Empire in 313, huge numbers of pagans became converts. It was probably in this period of Christianization that the use of Christian images became very widespread among the faithful, though with great differences from pagan habits. Robin Lane Fox states, by the early 5th century, we know of the ownership of private icons of saints by c. 480 to 500. We can be sure that the inside of a saint's shrine would be adorned with images and votive portraits, a practice which had probably begun earlier. When Constantine converted to Christianity, the majority of his subjects were still pagans, and the Roman imperial cult of the divinity of the emperor, expressed through the traditional burning of candles and the offering of incense to the emperor's image, was tolerated for a period because it would have been politically dangerous to attempt to suppress it. Indeed, in the 5th century, the portrait of the reigning emperor was still honored this way in the courts of justice and municipal buildings of the empire, and in 425 Philostorgius, an Arian Christian, charged the Orthodox Christians in Constantinople with idolatry because they still honored the image of the Emperor Constantine the Great, the founder of the city. In this way, Dix notes that this was more than a century before we find the first reference to a similar honoring of the image of Christ to his apostles or saints, but that it would seem a natural progression for the image of Christ, the King of heaven and earth, to be paid similar veneration as that given to the earthly Roman emperor. However, the Orthodox, Eastern Catholics, and other groups insist that veneration to icons is explicitly distinct from worship to idols as pagans did. This is explained further in later sections on this page. Theodosius to Justinian. After adoption of Christianity as the only permissible Roman state religion under Theodosius I, Christian art began to change not only in quality and sophistication, but also in nature. This was in no small part due to Christians being free for the first time to express the faith openly without persecution from the state. In addition to the faith spreading to the non-poor segments of society, paintings of martyrs and the feats began to appear, and early writers commented on the lifelike effect One of the elements a few Christian writers criticized in pagan art, the ability to imitate life. The writers mostly criticized pagan works of art for pointing to false gods, thus encouraging idolatry. Statues in the round were avoided as being too close to the principal artistic focus of pagan cult practices, as they have continued to be throughout the history of Eastern Christianity. Nilus of Sinai, in his letter to Heliodorus Silentiarius, records a miracle in which St. Plato of Ankara appeared to a Christian in a dream. The saint was recognized because the young man had often seen his portrait. This recognition of a religious apparition from likeness to an image was also a characteristic of pagan pious accounts of appearances of gods to humans, and was a regular topos in hagiography. One critical recipient of a vision from St. Demetrius of Thessaloniki apparently specified that the saint resembled the more ancient images of him, presumably the 7th century mosaics still in Hyas Demetrios. Another, an African bishop, had been rescued from Arab slavery by a young soldier called Demetrios, who told him to go to his house in Thessaloniki. Having discovered that most young soldiers in the city seemed to be called Demetrios, he gave up and went to the largest church in the city, to find his rescuer on the wall. During this period the church began to discourage all non-religious human images, the emperor and donor figures counting as religious. This became largely effective, so that most of the population would only ever see religious images and those of the ruling class. The word icon referred to any and all images, not just religious ones, but there was barely a need for a separate word for these. Luke's portrait of Mary. It is in a context attributed to the 5th century that the first mention of an image of Mary painted from life appears, though earlier paintings on catacomb walls bear resemblance to modern icons of Mary. Theodorus Lector, in his 6th century History of the Church 1-1, stated that Eudokia sent an image of the Mother of God, named Icon of the Hodegetria, from Jerusalem to Pulcheria, daughter of the Emperor Arcadius. The image was specified to have been painted by the Apostle Luke. Margherita Garducci relates a tradition that the original icon of Mary attributed to Luke, sent by Eudokia to Pulcheria from Palestine, was a large circular icon only of her head. When the icon arrived in Constantinople, it was fitted in as the head into a very large rectangular icon of her holding the Christ child, and it is this composite icon that became the one historically known as the Hodegetria. She further states another tradition that when the last Latin emperor of Constantinople, Baldwin II, fled Constantinople in 1261, he took this original circular portion of the icon with him. This remained in the possession of the Angevin dynasty, who had it likewise inserted into a much larger image of Mary and the Christ child, which is presently enshrined above the high altar of the Benedictine Abbey Church of Montevergine. Unfortunately, this icon has been over the subsequent centuries subjected to repeated repainting, so that it is difficult to determine what the original image of Mary's face would have looked like. However, Garducci also states that in 1950 an ancient image of Mary at the Church of Santa Francesca Romana was determined to be a very exact, but reverse mirror image of the original circular icon that was made in the 5th century and brought to Rome, where it has remained until the present. In later tradition, the number of icons of Mary attributed to Luke would greatly multiply. The Salis Populi Romani, the Theotokos of Vladimir, the Theotokos Ivaskar of Mount Athos, the Theotokos of Tikhvin, the Theotokos of Smolensk, and the Black Madonna of Czestochowa are examples, and another is in the cathedral on St. Thomas Mount, which is believed to be one of the 7 painted by St. Luke the Evangelist and brought to India by St. Thomas. Ethiopia has at least 7 more. In the period before and during the iconoclastic controversy, stories attributing the creation of icons to the New Testament period greatly increased, with several apostles and even the Virgin herself believed to have acted as the artist-commissioner of images. Iconoclast period. There was a continuing opposition to images and the misuse within Christianity from very early times. Whenever images threatened to gain undue influence within the Church, theologians have sought to strip them of the power. Further, there is no century between the 4th and the 8th in which there is not some evidence of opposition to images even within the Church. Nonetheless, popular favor for icons guaranteed the continued existence, while no systematic apologia for or against icons, or doctrinal authorization or condemnation of icons yet existed. The use of icons was seriously challenged by Byzantine imperial authority in the 8th century, though by this time opposition to images was strongly entrenched in Judaism and Islam. Attribution of the impetus toward an iconoclastic movement in Eastern Orthodoxy to Muslims or Jews seems to have been highly exaggerated, both by contemporaries and by modern scholars. Though significant in the history of religious doctrine, the Byzantine controversy over images is not seen as of primary importance in Byzantine history. Few historians still hold it to have been the greatest issue of the period. The iconoclastic period began when images were banned by Emperor Leo III the Isaurian sometime between 726 and 730. Under his son Constantine V, a council forbidding image veneration was held at Hieria near Constantinople in 754. Image veneration was later reinstated by the Empress Regent, Irene, under whom another council was held reversing the decisions of the previous iconoclast council and taking its title as Seventh Ecumenical Council. The council anathemized all who hold to iconoclasm, i.e., those who held that veneration of images constitutes idolatry. Then the ban was enforced again by Leo V in 815. And finally icon veneration was decisively restored by Empress Regent Theodora. From then on all Byzantine coins had a religious image, a symbol on the reverse, usually an image of Christ for larger denominations, with the head of the emperor on the obverse, reinforcing the bond of the state and the divine order. Akera poeta. The tradition of akera poeta accrued to icons that are alleged to have come into existence miraculously, not by a human painter. Such images functioned as powerful relics as well as icons, and their images were naturally seen as especially authoritative as to the true appearance of the subject. Naturally and especially because of the reluctance to accept mere human productions as embodying anything of the divine, a commonplace of Christian deprecation of man-made idols, like icons believed to be painted directly from the live subject. They therefore acted as important references for other images in the tradition. Beside the developed legend of the Mandalion or image of Edessa, was the tale of the Veil of Veronica, whose very name signifies true icon or true image, the fear of a false image remaining strong. Stylistic developments. Although there are earlier records of the use, no panel icons earlier than the few from the 6th century preserved at the Greek Orthodox St. Catherine's Monastery in Egypt survive, as the other examples in Rome have all been drastically overpainted. The surviving evidence for the earliest depictions of Christ, Mary and saints therefore comes from wall paintings, mosaics and some carvings. They are realistic in appearance, in contrast to the latest stylization. They are broadly similar in style, though often much superior in quality, to the mummy portraits done in wax and found at fame in Egypt. As we may judge from such items, the first depictions of Jesus were generic rather than portrait images, generally representing him as a beardless young man. It was some time before the earliest examples of the long-haired, bearded face that was later to become standardized as the image of Jesus appeared. When they did begin to appear, there was still variation. Augustine of Hippo said that no one knew the appearance of Jesus or that of Mary. However, Augustine was not a resident of the Holy Land and therefore was not familiar with the local populations and their oral traditions. Gradually, paintings of Jesus took on characteristics of portrait images. At this time, the manner of depicting Jesus was not yet uniform, and there was some controversy over which of the two most common icons was to be favored. The first, or Semitic form, showed Jesus with short and frizzy hair. The second showed a bearded Jesus with hair parted in the middle. The manner in which the god Zeus was depicted. Theodorus Lector remarked that of the two, the one with short and frizzy hair was more authentic. To support his assertion, he relates a story that a pagan commissioned to paint an image of Jesus used the Zeus form instead of the Semitic form, and that as punishment his hands withered. Though the development was gradual, we can date the full-blown appearance and general ecclesiastical acceptance of Christian images as venerated and miracle-working objects to the 6th century, when, as Hans Belting writes, we first hear of the Church's use of religious images. Quote, as we reach the second half of the 6th century, we find that images are attracting direct veneration and some of them are credited with the performance of miracles. Cyril Mango writes, in the post-Justinianic period the icon assumes an ever-increasing role in popular devotion, and there is a proliferation of miracle stories connected with icons, some of them rather shocking to our eyes. However, the earlier references by Eusebius and Irenaeus indicate veneration of images and reported miracles associated with them as early as the 2nd century. What might be shocking to our contemporary eyes may not have been viewed as such by the early Christians. Acts chapter 5 verse 15 reports that people brought the sick into the streets and laid them on beds and mats so that at least Peter's shadow might fall on some of them as he passed by. Symbolism in the icons of Eastern Orthodoxy and of the early medieval West, very little room is made for artistic license. Almost everything within the image has a symbolic aspect. Christ, the saints, and the angels all have halos. Angels have wings because they are messengers. Figures have consistent facial appearances, hold attributes personal to them, and use a few conventional poses. Color plays an important role as well. Gold represents the radiance of heaven, red, divine light, blue is the color of human life, white is the uncreated light of God, only used for resurrection and transfiguration of Christ. If you look at icons of Jesus and Mary, Jesus wears red undergarment with a blue outer garment and Mary wears a blue undergarment with a red overgarment. Thus the doctrine of deification is conveyed by icons. Letters are symbols too. Most icons incorporate some calligraphic text naming the person or event depicted. Even this is often presented in a stylized manner. Miracles. In the Eastern Orthodox Christian tradition there are reports of particular wonder-working icons that exude myrrh, or perform miracles upon petition by believers. When such reports are verified by the Orthodox hierarchy, they are understood as miracles performed by God through the prayers of the saint, rather than being magical properties of the painted wood itself. Theologically, all icons are considered to be sacred and are miraculous by nature, being a means of spiritual communion between the heavenly and earthly realms. However, it is not uncommon common for specific icons to be characterized as miracle-working, meaning that God has chosen to glorify them by working miracles through them. Such icons are often given particular names, and even taken from city to city where believers gather to venerate them and pray before them. Islands like that of Tinos are renowned for possessing such miraculous icons, and are visited every year by thousands of pilgrims. Eastern Orthodox teaching. The Eastern Orthodox view of the origin of icons is generally quite different from that of most secular scholars and from some in contemporary Roman Catholic circles. The Orthodox Church maintains and teaches that the sacred image has existed from the beginning of Christianity. Leonid Ouspensky has written, accounts that some non-Orthodox writers consider legendary are accepted as history within Eastern Orthodoxy, because they are a part of church tradition. Thus accounts such as that of the miraculous image not made by hands, and the weeping and moving Mother of God at the sign of Novgorod are accepted as fact. Church tradition tells us, for example, of the existence of an icon of the Savior during his lifetime and of icons of the Most Holy Theotokos immediately after him. Eastern Orthodoxy further teaches that a clear understanding of the importance of icons was part of the Church from its very beginning, and has never changed, although explanations of their importance may have developed over time. This is because icon painting is rooted in the theology of the Incarnation, which didn't change, though its subsequent clarification within the Church occurred over the period of the first 7 ecumenical councils. Also, icons served as tools of edification for the illiterate faithful during most of the history of Christendom. Eastern Orthodox find the first instance of an image or icon in the Bible when God made man in his own image, in Genesis chapter 1 verses 26 to 27. In Exodus, God commanded that the Israelites not make any graven image, but soon afterwards, he commanded that they make graven images of cherubim and other like things, both as statues and woven on tapestries. Later, Solomon included still more such imagery when he built the first temple. Eastern Orthodox believe these qualify as icons, in that they were visible images depicting heavenly beings and, in the case of the cherubim, used to indirectly indicate God's presence above the ark. In the book of Numbers it is written that God told Moses to make a bronze serpent, Nehushtan, and hold it up, so that anyone looking at the snake would be healed of the snake bites. In John chapter 3, Jesus refers to the same serpent, saying that he must be lifted up in the same way that the serpent was. John of Damascus also regarded the brazen serpent as an icon. Further, Jesus Christ himself is called the image of the invisible God in Colossians chapter 1 verse 15, and is therefore in one sense an icon. As people are also made in God's images, people are also considered to be living icons, and therefore sensed along with painted icons during Orthodox prayer services. According to John of Damascus, anyone who tries to destroy icons is the enemy of Christ, the Holy Mother of God and the saints, and is the defender of the devil and his demons. Quote, "This is because the theology behind icons is closely tied to the incarnational theology of the humanity and divinity of Jesus, so that attacks on icons typically have the effect of undermining or attacking the incarnation of Jesus himself as elucidated in the ecumenical councils." Basil of Caesarea, in his writing on the Holy Spirit, says, "The honor paid to the image passes to the prototype." He also illustrates the concept by saying, "If I point to a statue of Caesar and ask you, 'Who is that?' your answer would properly be, 'It is Caesar.' When you say such, you do not mean that the stone itself is Caesar, but rather, the name and honor you ascribe to the statue passes over to the original, the archetype, Caesar himself." So it is with an icon. Thus to kiss an icon of Christ, in the Eastern Orthodox view, is to show love towards Christ Jesus himself, not in mere wooden paint making up the physical substance of the icon. Worship of the icon as somehow entirely separate from its prototype is expressly forbidden by the Seventh Ecumenical Council.